reasonable to think when we look at the naval ratings and the role that they have today, which is to draw the gun carriage. You'd think that was a noble tradition going back hundreds of years. It's not. One of those great quirks of these events, you go back to the funeral of Queen Victoria in 1901 at Windsor, the gun carriage was drawn by horses from the Royal Mews. The horses misbehaved at that funeral event, and the result was that one of those attending suggested to the king that the naval ratings who were at hand should take over and take the carriage, and that's what happened. And it was such a success that since then it's been a feature of funerals of sovereigns. So just in case you start imagining that this is a tradition we've been enjoying for hundreds of years, it's not. It's barely a century old, but it's been kept because, as we'll see later on, it is a magnificent sight, as indeed is the sight of the pipes and drums. And Robert Hardman, to see them in this number and to hear the sound that they will produce, the intensity and power of it, will really impress people. People watching not just across the UK but across the world. It's a sound like no other.
It is, Hugh, and no one knew and loved the pipes as well as Her Majesty, Her late Majesty. Every day outside Buckingham Palace, her piper would everyone set their clocks by the Queen's piper performing at 9 a.m. every morning beneath her window, and she loved it. And that would happen wherever she was. And at 9:15 he'd stop, so everyone could check their watches again. But it state banquets wherever she was. At the end of dinner, the pipers would be asked in and would pipe around the table. It's a sound that is as familiar to her as any other, and it's so good to see so many of them here today.
And it's a great love, I suppose, that she shared with her mother, who, of course, as a Scotswoman, you might expect, but really was a great devotee of the sound of pipes.
Well, exactly. I mean, it's often said that the Queen is the most Scottish monarch that we've actually had since James I and VI, thanks to her mother, who, of course, was Scottish, and through whom the Queen was descended in two different directions to Robert and Bruce. I mean, Scotland, and as we've seen during the last 10 days, the magnificent sights from the little backwaters of Aberdeenshire, down through the glens, down all the way through Scotland to the Royal Mile. Scotland has played a magnificent part in all this, and I think it's absolutely fitting that here at the end, the pipes are here, the Royal Company of Archers are here. There will be a very strong Scottish dimension we will see today.
Well, they've started playing traditional tunes, ones that the Queen loved, and let's enjoy some, shall we? So the young ratings proudly making their way up to Parliament Square because they have a great duty ahead of them. Robert and David are still with me. And David, it's appropriate as well as we see all of those young sailors, just to reflect on the role of the Navy in the history of Emperor and Commonwealth, and of course the fact that the Queen, with her father and husband, had such strong links with the Navy. So it's the service, I suppose, that you can find so many powerful connections with in terms of the Queen's reign.
You can. The Commonwealth, the former empire, is made possible by the Royal Navy. The Royal Navy's culture flows through the Royal Family in a way that I think is unique to the other services, not to dismiss the Army or the Air Force, of course. But I think what we're seeing here is what I think Royal funerals have always been, a mixture, an accretion of very old traditions and invented traditions, and they are military events. They long have been. Queen Victoria in particular put this in place, the army at the centre, but they're also a public events, and it's very telling that this is here in the centre of London and not in Windsor.
Looking very smart and clearly having prepared in detail. And here we have the next section of the forming up, if you like, the band of His Majesty's Royal Marines, who will be leading the Tri-Service Guard of Honour up to Parliament Square for this procession. There we have Nijmegen Company Grenadier Guards with their King's Colour. They, of course, are familiar features on the day of the birthday parade, the big events. But the Grenadier Guards, of course, the Queen was the Colonel of the Grenadier Guards for quite a few decades. She was made Colonel at the age of 16 by her father. It was her first big military appointment. Along with Nijmegen Company, we have the Royal Air Force, and they are proudly carrying the King's Colour for the Royal Air Force today for this Tri-Service Guard of Honour in Parliament Square. And there we have, of course, at the front the Royal Navy with King's Colour, the Surface Flotilla. So Tri-Service, three services, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, led by the band of Royal Marines. All of the colours draped, as you can see, because it's been 10 days of national mourning. You'll see lots of the colours and standards and other insignia draped in black for the formal period of national mourning, which clearly will include today as the day of the state funeral. So they're leaving Wellington Barracks. Just in the background there we saw the more modern building of the Guards Chapel, which is to one side of the Wellington Barracks themselves. And now we have the Royal Marines leading the way along Birdcage Walk. That is St James's Park that we can see just in the background. And then the Royal Air Force with the King's colour for the Royal Air Force. So this Tri-Service Guard will be in position in Parliament Square, and they'll be facing Parliament itself, facing Palace Yard, the gates to New Palace Yard, because that is where they'll be in a position to wait for the procession to leave Westminster Hall in a short while. The service at the Abbey will start in an hour's time, but before then we have other elements of these processions forming up, and it's not just at this part of Westminster itself, not just in this section of St James's Park, but elsewhere too, because that procession, which will happen after the service is 1.25 miles long, and that will be forming up during the service itself. That's the biggest military procession that we've seen in London for decades and decades, and probably since the funeral of George VI back in 1952. And that will be formed up on the Mall and coming all the way back to Parliament Square. So you can imagine the extent of that. So as we see the heart of Parliament Square there, as the pipers and the drummers make their way, let's join Sophie once again.